Okay, when you can, read 150.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make my document come here. Okay. Adobe didn't figure out how to leave documents in the same place yet, so
That's fine.
190, 150, 150. All the virtues, yeah? Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. How do I make it? Sorry. Oh. 150. All the virtues are found also in the gods. 1. Many gods are honored by the names of virtues. 2. All goodness originates with the gods. 3. Prior to those who participate in virtues sometimes, there must be those who participate in them always. And prior to the participating, there must be the participated. Hence, since the companions of the gods belong to those who participate, the things participated, i.e., the virtues themselves, must be gods.
Right. So, what motivates this? This is motivated by the issue that was raised with regard to the Peripatetics, right? The Peripatetics thinks that the man who devotes himself to contemplation has no need besides wisdom as a virtue. And a fortiori, they think that God has no virtue besides wisdom, or God is wisdom, maybe. And now your 150 and 151 are going to be about arguments for thinking that the gods have virtues, and that they have them all. So the first one is many gods are honored by the names of virtues. So this, I mean, this can mean that virtues are attributed to the gods, but also, for instance, that you have um, goddesses like piety, or wisdom itself, and they're like honored as gods. You know, the so that's like a factical thing from practice. We see virtues being honored as gods. The second, all goodness originates with the gods, and this goes back to the Neoplatonic doctrines that the gods are ultimately henads, and each henad is a goodness, is a form of goodness. So goodness starts there. And the third is prior to those who participate in virtues sometimes, our souls, there must be those participate in them always, daimonists. And prior to the participating, there must be the participated. Therefore, since the companions of the gods, those are the daimonists, belong to those who participate, the things participated, that are the virtues themselves, must be gods. Right? And so the gods, and so he's yeah, so the gods, qua henads, they are participated goodnesses, and so in that sense, they're virtues. Um, the so far so good.
Okay.
So yeah, so let's think about how this answers the peripatetic. The Barbadic, of course, can just say, well, these traditions that are honoring these gods by names of virtues, they can say, well, that's just a name, or they can say, well, this is just folk people who don't do philosophy and they don't understand what gods are. And the second thing, all goodness originates with the gods. And they can say, yeah, sure, but yeah, the origin of all the virtues is wisdom. So the only virtue that there is amongst the gods is wisdom. And I guess they can answer maybe something similar in three. So about, yeah, so maybe the diamond is they show many different virtues, and so the virtues have to be there amongst the gods. I guess of course, the Neoplatonist, he doesn't want to deny the unity of all the virtues, but which is kind of what the the peripatetic is relying on, that they all ultimately depend on wisdom. But maybe behind this is a richer account of like the unity and multiplicity of the virtues. So yeah, like wisdom is central to all the other virtues, but maybe there's, as it were, a different goodness, um, a different value manifested by each of the other virtues, even if in embodiment and participation they all have to come together. So, for instance, of course, the take for instance courage, and of course, courage down here, you'll say, well, that doesn't seem to be something independent of wisdom, of recognizing when it's the right time to get angry and so on. But if you say no, well, but the origin of courage is ultimately something like purity, right? Separation from lower things, then the an attachment to higher things, then it seems that you could say, well, that's just as needed for wisdom as wisdom is needed for that. And so you can say that maybe up there it's clear the unity and multiplicity of the virtues, and so that you don't have a reason to just posit wisdom as the virtue of the gods, that's the origin of all the good of all goodness. Um, and so that might be part of the argument here with the peripatetics. I'm also reminded here that Olympiodorus in his course, also on the Phaedo, or is it on the Alcibiades? Anyway, he has a passage where he uses the co-implication of the virtues to explain how the gods are all in one, or all in each, right? And that's often seen as, oh, he's talking about the virtues here because because he's teaching Christians, right? So he doesn't want to involve them in any polytheism, right? So he's like, oh, if you want to understand this, you just think of how all the virtues imply each other.
Mm.
But in order for him to be able to do that, there has to be some more substantial multiplicity of virtues in this unity of virtues, right? If he wants to really say something analogous to how the gods are with each other. Um, so that's 150. 151 will continue this question about what's the divine origin or place of the virtues.
Okay, so I'll do that. 151. So, but just to be clear, when we say the virtues are found in the gods, they're not found in the gods in the same way as in us, right? It's not that gods need courage or something like that. It's just that, like, the source of courage
No,
is the gods.
yeah, so it's going to be something like that. The ultimate value or goodness realized by courage is amongst the gods, right? So we can see this when he talks about participation, right? So we have a virtue, which is courage, which is a participation on our part. So here, courage informs the multiplicity of our souls and our body. Whereas amongst the gods, courage wouldn't be something that informs something else. It would be something separately existent. It would be it wouldn't even be a form. It would be something that a form aims at, right? That a noose, that a certain noose aims at. And so in that sense, it would be like the value that's transmitted through that virtue.
Okay. Um, 151. In what divine order do the virtues first manifest themselves? Okay. Evidently, in the same order as soul, since virtue is perfection of the soul, as choice and decision are its activities and actualization. Therefore, the Chaldean oracles line primal virtue with primal soul. Also, I don't understand any of this. Also, one might observe that the natural function of virtues is to impose order on the chaotic. And for this reason, they first appear in the creative order. But how to reconcile this with their purifying function? The answer is that the Creator himself, in the act of creation, stayed in his natural abode, and even takes the road to the castle of Cronus. Indeed, he himself constituted the soul from three elements: one part that inclines towards the lower world, one that naturally reverts upon itself, and one that can lift itself up towards its cause. That's why, as it said in the Phaedrus, that certain virtues exist already in the supra. Then there's another question. Then why is it said in the Phaedrus that certain virtues exist already in this supra-celestial region? In that passage, the virtues serve to describe by analogy intelligible entities of that level in the same way as meadow, plain, pasture. So it's just a metaphor, analogy.
So let's go back to the beginning in 151. So, in what divine order do the virtues first manifest themselves? So the question is, so this is supposed to be what is one of the distinguishing marks of Plato's theology, that Plato tells us where each divine thing is in the causal order, right? Is in the causal chain. So Proclus makes this point when he's discussing eternity, right? So you can get like a definition of eternity from Aristotle, which Proclus can find like basis for his own understanding of eternity there as aion, right? This etymology of aion comes from Aristotle originally, what always is. And in De Caelo, he says about the things that are eternal, that they do not suffer with through time, they don't need to eat and drink, and so on. So it's yeah, Aristotle already on his own. You can find in Aristotle the correct conception of what is eternity. What is proper to Plato, um, like Plato's discussion of eternity for Proclus, is that he locates eternity precisely between being and the living being itself, and the living being itself, because he says that eternity is that it is the model for time, and that it remains in one. And in his exegesis of these passages in Plato, he finds like the exact position of eternity there, what he calls the second intelligible triad. So I don't have to go into that now, but just like this is the idea, like what's so important about locating things in which divine order does this come from? So that where does it show up in the causal sequence? And that means also like how can we then have scientific demonstrative knowledge about it, right? And there are three different possibilities discussed in this paragraph. The first is that it's in soul, and the reason there's some testimony from the Chaldean oracles, but it's basically, well, because the first thing that has virtue is soul, right? So the same causal order that generates soul also generates virtue. The next thing is that it actually belongs to the demiurge, and so it belongs to the intellective order. Why? Because he imposes form on chaos, right? Or form on disorder. And that's what virtues do, right? But then there's a problem there, which is, wait, but virtues also purify. Is there something properly purificatory of the demiurge? And then he says yes, right? So yeah, he invokes stuff from the Timaeus and also from Pindar, and so to emphasize how there's this aspect of nous imposes order on what's disordered, but it also maintains its distance from what is disordered. So there's also this element of purification there. And this is also seen in the creation of the world soul, right? Where it's made out of sameness, difference, and being. And I think he's saying that the one part that inclines towards the lower world is difference, the one that naturally reverts upon itself is going to be um is going probably to be being, and the one that can lift itself up towards its cause is going to be sameness. It could be that I'm getting sameness and being mixed up. I mean, it could be you could interpret the other way. But anyway, he is um, made from these three elements, and I think that's what he has in mind. So, and then there's a third possibility, which is in the Phaedrus, right? So the Phaedrus in the contemplation that the gods and the good and the souls that manage to drive their chariots up there get to see, it said that they see temperance and beauty and justice there. So it's or and knowledge. I think it's and and so there are virtues, and so it seems like there are virtues either in the supracelestial region. And the supracelestial is supposed to be beyond intellect. It's supposed to be the primary place where gods receive their different attributes. It's a call what Proclus calls number, right? And Damascus follows him. So where you get this attribution of like each god get each like each divine unity, each Henad gets its own immediate participant. So it's something beyond nous, and and so that's another thing. Now there they say like, and then what is Damascus's final answer? I think the answer is that it probably in the most primary sense, I think it's that it's in the intellective order. Um, Also because when he talks about the perfection of soul, he says, um, um, evidently in the same order as soul, since virtue is perfection of the soul, as choice and decision are its activities and actualization, therefore the Chaldean oracles line primal virtue and primal with primal soul. So here he's talking about the source. That's the um, what's translated as primal here. It's the fontal soul, or so the soul that is the source of all souls. And actually, the source of souls can be located beyond soul itself. It can be, you can think of the ultimate cause of life in intellect. And there are two possibilities here. There's on the one hand the mixing bowl, right? The mixing bowl that the demiurge uses to mix soul. And but also prior to the demiurge, there's what he identifies with Rhea and Hecate, which is the cause not only for souls of their life, but also for all the life, so all the activity in all the like connected activity within intellect. Um, so the and that makes sense to say that, well, since the what perf virtue is what perfects soul, so it's actually the goal of soul, so it has to pre-exist it, has to be in a prior order. And so it would be in the intellective order. And and that also lines up, I guess, with the hierarchy of virtues, right? Which ends in some sense with paradigmatic virtues, with the archetypal virtues, where you in some sense are identical with nous, right? And um and so that's the and so that is where is the divine order where we're going to find, as it were, the very first paradigms of virtue, right? Um and so in general, you have both the thing of imposing order, but you also have living separately and being purified. Actually, also the intellective order, since it's the first one that relates to, um, so prior to nous, when you're just talking about like being and life, you aren't discussing the reality as divided into different levels. Even because prior to Nous, you don't have these distinct, as it were, forms for each level. You just have all of reality, and being deals with all of reality, as it were, as a block, and life deals constitutes all of reality as divided into many levels, but without really distinct content, just being higher and lower and depending on each other. And in Nous is where you get the division of reality into levels with distinct content. And it's only there also for the first time do you have a concern of of purification, of keeping something separate and its content pure from lower things. And so that's also the first place that purification appears. So, in that sense, it is the intellectual where the virtues first make their appearance, and so it's in the theory of the intellectual gods, so of the causes for what does it mean to be a nous, and for how does nous function as as a global system in the world. Um, it's there that you will find the grounding for, say, ethics, right? In your theory of nous. That's basically what the paragraph is discussing.
So in some way, the answer should be all of them.
Well, I think it's the end. All of the orders discussed.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't. I think he says the highest one, the super celestial region. He'll say no, that's just a metaphor, right? And that's as much a metaphor as when you say that there's a meadow up there, right? Um, and I guess in and so no, I think like the first appearance is in the intellective, and the virtues do manifest in the psychic level, hypercosmic level, which is how they call it when they're discussing
Hmm.
uh, divine orders. But there it's already, as it were, a something derivative. It's not the first manifestation. Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The Yeah. Okay. Um,
Okay. So
shall we continue now?
keep
He's
going.
gonna, in the next paragraph, he's gonna discuss in specific details of the passage about the virtues, right? Where he had just it comes right after the part about purification, and so he had discussed how the philosopher has to separate himself from the world and from his body, therefore he desires death. And so he starts off by saying that courage and moderation are specially belong to the philosophers, and that and so he's going to talk about like why does he say this especially, and why does he start with courage? And he's going to say like it's weird by what the many by what the according to what the many think um, uh, are virtues, and or rather he's going to say that the virtues of the many are weird, and he's going to comment on the fact that the many are sometimes called many and sometimes the others. um Go back to questions about why do philosophers and other human beings discuss see death in different ways, um, and what really is this servile virtue? If it's really, does it really, how do we give the same name to it as to true virtue? And yeah, this distinction between imperfect and perfect virtues.
Hmm. Okay.
So let's go.
So 152. Okay. Why does he mention courage first? Because it is the characteristic virtue of the purificatory life. Just as temperance determines the life of ethical virtue, justice, social life, insight, contemplative life. Hmm, that's
Right.
interesting.
Insight translates phronesis here.
Okay. So why is courage?
Why
So
is
now
courage
we have
first?
four Yeah, like we have the four virtues corresponding to four levels also, the four kinds of
Indeed.
virtue.
Yeah, and remember also that at each of these levels, especially Marinus made an effort to find all four cardinal virtues at each level. But then he's saying, so there are the four cardinal virtues at each level, but at each of them there's one that is characteristic of it. So the ethical virtue, which is the one of um, good habituation, being well brought up, there what you're the main virtue is temperance. And the in the social or political one, where you are ordering the passions according to reason, that's justice, and makes sense because then the main dialogue about those four is the Republic. Here in the purificatory, it's courage because it's the essence of it. It's like it's reduced to um, um, uh, is reduced to wanting death, right? And so they see, and separation, and then contemplation is associated. The contemplative life is associated with wisdom, and so that's Proclus's answer. Now we're going to get Damascus's answer.
Okay. Um, Now, rather, so that he says, rather, we should go by the natural order of the essential features of each. First, one has to stand firm against inferior powers, which would be courage. Then, revert upon it oneself, which would be temperance. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why. Um, then develop, that's purification, right? Then develop one's natural activity or emotion.
Right. I think this is not no longer associating with different kinds of life, but rather within the purificatory life, what you have to do for a second or third.
Mm.
And so the first thing you have to do is courage. You have to stand firm against the inferior powers. And then you have to revert upon oneself. That second part of the purificatory life. Once you separate yourself by what's lower. Then you develop your own natural activity. So that would be justice, and that would already be kind of the contemplative life, right? Because you're doing what's natural to you as a soul. Although here it might be develop one's natural activity is like do mathematics and not yet do dialectic and vision of the forms, because that would be nous activity. And then finally, by this very activity, distinguish between good and evil. So that's prudence. And so so Proclus says that the text first mentions the courage because it's what's central to the purificatory life, and this text is all about the purificatory life, and also this passage. Damascus says, no, the order is because the first thing that you do in the purificatory life is to have a stand for separate yourself from what's inferior, and that's courage.
Okay. Um, Now, 153. Why is this kind of courage? I mean, there's also some. Okay, it's also just because courage is the virtue that has to do with facing death. Like,
Sure,
would
like you
be
could also give
simple.
this like more close to the text thing, and I guess that may be the yeah, that's like a third option. That's neither of these. I guess the more interesting thing is that the like Proclus thinks that courage is the essence of purification, whereas Damascus thinks it's just the first step, not necessarily the essence. Um, I guess that there's a more some kind of substantial debate there.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I'm not sure where to go on that debate. Like, I can see the point for Proclus. I'm not really sure if we can say that that's the that for I'm not really sure what you would say to about courage, about purification, purification about separation from lower things, and that's what the and that's what courage is. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, don't know really how you would assert that courage isn't a characteristic feature of the purificatory life. Um, and now in the next thing, just a warning, he's changing the subject because now he's going to talk about the virtues of the many.
Okay. Now, okay. So why, let's go on the text. Why is this kind, 153, why is this kind of courage and temperance preposterous, right? That was Plato's argument, that it's fake, right? It's just exchanging one for one. Because it is mixed with its own privation, like with the opposite of it, and is not what it purports to be and puts on the appearance of what is not. Okay.
Yeah, so like courage is mixed with being afraid of bigger things, and temperance is mixed with actually wanting other pleasures more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Now, 154. Why are those without a philosophical education called the other and the many? The others, not us, and the many. The many, and of course, all these questions are not real questions, right? Like, we know why they're called. They're not us, and they're the many because they're most people.
right.
Uh,
He has
okay.
like a richer interpretation.
The many, as furthest apart from, next page, from the one, obviously. The others, as furthest apart from their own archetype. So they're also far from the one and also from themselves. Is that what they mean to say?
Um,
Their own
I
archetype.
th Yeah, so so they're furthest apart from, well, I mean, being apart from the one is being apart from yourself, right? You want the one so far as you want to be yourself. You're far away from the one you are not yourself. So they are least themselves, and they are also least human, right? So the this goes back to the question about that the theurgic virtues are unitary and existential, and the other virtues are called essential and formal. And so they are called many insofar as they lack theurgic virtue, and so they're not themselves, they're far, far away from the one. And they're called others insofar as they lack the essential virtues of realizing what they are. I guess not just even humans, but they're not realizing their essences as rational souls. Um, so so that's yeah, and so it is not just that they are other because they're not us, and they're many because we are few. Right? There's a more there's a deeper philosophical uh,
Mm-hmm.
teaching here.
Right.
So this also affirms like that you have to be you have to fulfill your nature as a rational soul, and also you have to be yourself, right? There are these two, as it were, general commands or imperatives.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I guess that helps us explain why like why we're not outnumbered, like something like that.
Yeah, well, I think why you're outnumbered is then also explained. I mean, yeah, it's explained by this metaphysical framing because of the pyramid, structure of metaphysical of metaphysics.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in this sense, Plato calls the object of sense perception the other things in Parmenides, intelligible reality being things themselves.
Right. Mhm. That's just support for his
For the idea that the
yeah,
other means not intelligible reality.
right, and furthest from their own archetype. Yeah.
Okay.
And also this connects with the idea that being one is being yourself because intelligible reality is what is closest to the one.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Now, 155. So the whole doctrine is deduced as follows. Now, that was one of these things where he shows the syllogism. Then
Right.
the non-philosopher, I forgot how to like speak this. The non-philosopher considers death an okay, I don't know. Considers death an
Okay,
evil.
so it's the non-philosopher considers death an evil. Whoever considers death an evil faces it for fear of a greater evil. Whoever faces it for fear of a greater evil faces out of cowardice. Therefore, the non-philosopher faces death out of cowardice.
Okay, because it's not that he thinks that death is not an evil, but it's just fear. He's just afraid of the greater evil. That's the
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
156, and I guess this explains this. Ordinary people regard death as a terrible thing, as terrible as non-existence, and even because they think that they will stop existing, which I guess they will in the sense of their life, soul body composite. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and even if they are naturally brave, they look upon it as the destruction of their own selves.
Mhm.
So bravery doesn't solve that. Those whose standard or natural bravery, maybe there's a non-natural bravery, like intellectual bravery. Those whose standard is conventional morals, even though they may believe in the immortality of the soul, right, still think the living body necessary to attain perfection in their own kind of virtue, meaning conventional morality, and therefore they have misgivings about death.
Oh, I'm so the translation is hiding this bit. Those who standard is conventional morals. These are the people who just have ethical virtue. Okay. Are just well brought up, but they're not necessarily good citizens. Ordinary people then are the people who are even below this, and so that's the people who just have natural virtue,
Mm,
and that's why he mentions natural bravery. Those who standardize life in the community are the people who have political virtue. Okay.
okay,
Yes.
so that
Yes.
um, so then ordinary people are they for them death is a non-existence. The conventional morals um, might already believe in an immortality of the soul, but they will still need perfection of their own kind, meaning of the natural, sorry, of like the ethical virtues, um,
Right.
like
So
the
you can think,
habituation.
yeah, so like you can be well brought up and you could and you were taught the soul is immortal. And for instance, you can think that the soul is immortal because part of being well brought up is that you take care of your ancestors, right? So your parents taught you to, sacrifice to your ancestors and to pray to them. And then you think that you have to live in order to continue sacrificing, and you have to have children in order to continue sacrificing. And so there you see, these people might even believe in the immortality of the soul, but they think that for them to be good human beings, they have to have bodies, right? Or they at least have to have descendants, right?
Mm,
So you see here that the ethical virtue still makes people, afraid of death in some way. You know?
okay, I guess they're not wrong, right, for thinking that. Like
Well,
for the natural virtue or the ethical virtue are virtues of this kind of life.
yeah, yeah. I guess the thing is like, so this goes into the question about how does Proclus reconcile transmigration with ancestors? which is unclear. And my solution is that the he thinks that actually the ancestor cult to the daimon. And sometimes you find this also in other people. So it's like cult to the family spirit. And I guess the people who have the and so uh they still might be wrong about exactly what soul it is that's imperishable and who they're actually and who their sacrifices are for this thing. So they might actually be wrong about having the misgivings about death.
Okay. Okay. Um, those I didn't read this yet, right? Those who stand in his life in the community also admit they cannot do without the body as an instrument. So that's somewhat more because the body is now an instrument; it's not them for the political
Mm,
virtue. So that they do consider death a kind of evil. Hmm.
yeah. So here it's an instrument, whereas the for the others it was about attaining perfection. So that might be yeah. So it might be a bit more separate. Like so the people who have political virtue are a bit more separate from that. But still, they think, oh, if I die, I can no longer serve my city. I can no longer
Mm.
help others. Mm.
Okay. Right. So it's like right, but it's not like the city is composed of bodies, although it kind of is. Or the city
No,
also
the
has like
city,
this non-bodily existence.
yeah, yeah, the city has this non-bodily existence, and the city is composed of, people, but of rational individuals. But the whole city, I guess it is like what is the project is making the people in the city who are embodied attain eudaimonia, right? Attain flourishing. And so you need to be in a body for that in one way or another.
Hmm. Okay. But now we get to the it follows that only the man whose aim is purification can believe that death is good, since it helps him achieve his end, so it becomes a positive good.
Right.
Mm,
This is the point that he made earlier that for the man who's purifying himself, for the philosopher, death is an activity, it's something he does, right? Whereas all these other people who are just up to political virtue, death is something that they suffer.
okay. Um, ordinary. I'm sorry, I'm went back. In this way, the first proposition is proved true, meaning that the non-philosopher considers death an evil. The second is evident. When we have to choose between evils, we prefer the lesser evil to the greater. And which is the lesser evil? We don't. He didn't really like explain
Is
why there
is
would be
so
something
the
great
second
worse than death.
proposition, yeah, well, the second proposition considers that he who considers death an evil faces it for fear of a greater evil. Well, I guess that there's it would depend on the three kinds. So the ordinary people, um, I I guess they think death is destruction of their self. So they think death is certainly a very great evil, but maybe they think that destruction of someone they love is worse, right? They think that someone else values it more valuable. So that could be something. Those whose standard is conventional morals, well, the greater evil might be something like the death of this is something close, of course, the death of their children, which would be the end of the family line, right? Um, and so but, and, and so here it is, in some sense, still about, or yeah, and so this is in some sense still about protecting, but since there is some kind of belief in the immortality of the soul, then that's it's less of a great evil death, but still rather substantial. For the political person, then the greater evil would be injustice, right? So you prefer to die than let a tyrant rule, or something like that. Or you prefer to die than to let a, a false philosophy take hold of the city. I don't know. Um, and so, or I guess, yeah, or I guess maybe examples of the like this could also apply to the ethical, but also in case of the of the political, you accept to go into exile because you understand that you are a blight on the city, right? Like Oedipus, right? Something like that. And of course, exile is tantamount to death. So this is also, and so those would be like the greater evils, like examples of greater evils.
Right.
So now the third proposition is he who faces death for fear of a greater evil faces out of cowardice.
Mm-hmm. The third is that the same man will be a coward and a hero. For he is afraid. He is afraid. Consequently, the only brave man is the man on the way to purification who considers death a boon.
Right.
So he's a coward because he's afraid, and he just like rationally decides to prefer the lesser evil, so to speak. But um, that doesn't make him brave in itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
So true bravery is only found in the purifying man.
Mm-hmm. Now.
Um, he continues asking how do we call brave a person who's not a philosopher? Or
Mm-hmm.
no, it's the no, it's no. How do you call the purifying man brave?
Right. 157. How can the word brave apply to such a man? If he faces death as a terrifying fate, then he can no longer be said to have freed himself from the body. If he regards it as beneficent, he may be free from the body, but he is no longer brave. Courage being confident in the midst of dangers. This is a good
Hmm.
question. It turns out this bravery is not bravery anymore, because bravery has something to do with danger, at least. And according to this
Yeah.
person, there's no danger. It's great. Okay. It can be replied, so that's, I guess, the first reply, or Proclus replied. It can be replied that this is the notion of courage as a social virtue. So, in other words, that this definition of courage, being confident in the midst of dangers, is really the social definition of courage. While on the level of purification, it is a total separation from the inferior and rather impassibility and emotional balance in dangers.
So here it's the virtue. The word brave is analogous. It doesn't mean the same thing in every context.
Right, or in some sense, I mean, the social definition can be included somehow in this definition. Something like being above things that cause you fear just has two levels. Like one sense of being above is that you still have fear, but you manage it, and then another level is that you don't think that it's dangerous at all. Something like that.
Right, right. And here he uses the key word, so impassibility. So the fear isn't and the danger isn't a consideration in your moral calculus. And the emotional balance here is metriopatheia. So you have your fear in check in the right level. Yeah.
Okay. Now, a more correct, and I guess Damascus is saying, a more correct
Yeah.
explanation is that purifying virtue in general is contempt of all that is painful or pleasant. Um, Not to oneself, when this state nothing is, but all other men.
Right. So even if for the person, even for Socrates here, we can still call him brave because, death is commonly for human beings accepted to be something dangerous. And so we think that we call him brave.
Mm-hmm.
No. Um, and so Proclus goes for the more metaphysical or the more like, oh, there's some substantial question here. Whereas Damascus is more, no, we can just explain this. It's more like philosophy of language about how we use the word brave.
Right. It just means so. According to Damascus, it still has the original definition. It's just like brave, what you call brave, or facing what other people call danger.
Yeah. You know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, 158. The average man chooses death in preference to a greater evil. The philosopher citizen too chooses it as a lesser evil in exchange for a greater good. The that's what I don't know what this philosopher citizen is.
I don't
Um,
know why he called translated that way. I would just translate it as the man with political virtue.
okay, okay. The philosopher. So again, the first person would be in
The,
a
the, the,
greater
the first person is
evil. The person that only
oh,
has
okay.
natural virtue, something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, there's this difference that the person who already has political virtue, he chooses it in prefer he chooses it as a lesser evil in exchange for a greater good, right? Um, I wonder if that's already not the case with the ethical person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you, yeah, I'm not sure. But in any case, we gave as an example that you can die for justice. And for instance, you can accept a death penalty because it's the just thing. And this would be an example a of a good citizen, and he's choosing death as a lesser evil in exchange for a greater good, which is justice.
Mm-hmm. But the philosopher in search of purification chooses it as a preferable without reserve and for its own sake. So he wants to die. Um, this gives us three kinds of courage.
Right. There seems to be a different, maybe even a different answer, like a third answer to that question. Um, so, mm,
Okay. Meaning to the question of how we call this courage.
how we call this courage? Um, yeah, so that would mean that courage being confidence in the midst of dangers. Um, yeah, yeah, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's carry on. Let's soldier on.
Okay. Now, this gives us three kinds of courage. On the face of it, courage conquers pain and temperance conquers pain. So that's this end. Okay, 159. On the face of it, courage conquers pain and temperance pleasure. But in reality, both conquer both. Because I guess, hello, the courageous person is also foregoing pleasures of continuing to live or something. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
what is the difference then? That courage does so by undaunted resistance to both pleasure and pain. So is like resisting it. Temperance by turning away from them. Not sure the difference. Justice too, in fact, shuns them as alien activities or affects, and prudence because it recognizes both as harmful.
Right. So all the different virtues. I mean, yeah, having any kind of virtue is not being led by pains and pleasures. The justice turns them away because they're just not relevant, right? The only thing relevant for justice is what you need to do now. Prudence recognizes that sees them for what they are as harmful to you, right? Um, Now those are easier cases. Now, temperance and courage, it seems to be that the temperance is moving away from them. So I think temperance involves simply avoiding situations where you are subject to intense pleasures and pains, right? Whereas, and that's also like this, we saw temperance glossed in the purificatory light as turning towards yourself. So you're just not um, you're not busying yourself with your body and with your affects. So their temperance is about, knowing yourself and knowing yourself as a soul. So you turn away from situations where there is much pleasure and pain, and also, I guess, even then, the way is you just turn, uh, even if you are in them, you disconsider them, you despise them or something. Whereas courage, you go into the midst of pleasure and pain, right? Courage involves facing situations where you have or do face these affects, but you say an active no to them, right? Instead of just avoiding them. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's it. Um, so that's the
So it would seem
distinction.
that courage is worse than temperance. Worse in the sense like you
Yeah,
do think that there's problems, that there's pleasure and
so
pain.
that goes back to Damascus's argument for why courage is first discussed in the text, right? Because their courage is just the first step. He says, first one has to stand firm against the inferior powers. And so you just say, no, I'm not going to eat chocolate. And then you get temperance, which is reverting upon oneself, right? It's,
Mm-hmm.
well, what do I really like? Something like that. Yeah.
Just and justice, which is each thing doing what it needs to be doing. Um,
Yeah, so justice is then a whole other level because justice, you're just doing something different and then you just don't bother.
mm-hmm.
You're busy, so you don't have time for pleasure. Okay.
Okay. Now, 160. A man whose courage is such that he becomes a hero out of sort of fear is a hero in action only. He does not choose courage because he considers it good, but because it is necessary. The same holds good of a man who is temperate in a comparable way.
Um, right. Here, I don't know if this translation of becoming a hero is really useful. It means to act like I I was like, the man who is brave in this way, as um, it is necessary to be brave about something, or wait, is such that he becomes a hero out of a sort of fear. Where is the out of a sort of fear? Oh, okay. Oh, so the man who's brave because he's forced to be brave is a hero in action only. He does not choose courage because it is a good, because it's necessary. Okay, so it's like if you just rise to the occasion and you are brave at that moment, you are not a brave person because the brave person wants to become brave because he thinks being brave itself is good. and not just that he's in a situation where he has to be brave.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of distinction he's making. So possession in general, possession of a virtue involves wanting that virtue as a good in itself. Right.
Right. Okay.
In that sense, yeah, again, only the purifying man is brave because only he wants bravery as a good in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Uh,
Okay. Uh, let's see. The same holds. Where are we? So, uh, 161. The ordinary man chooses greater pleasures in preference to lesser ones, and smaller discomforts in preference to greater ones. A man who is still That's one level. Then a man who is still imperfect in virtue prefers the more honorable pleasures to those that are less decorous. That's like the again, that's like the ethical level. The philosopher
yeah,
statesman again means something like the political level, accepts pleasure that
yeah.
is necessary for the attainment of a good. The man whose aim is purification, whoever is in no way accessible to pleasure, and he is aware of it in the same way as Socrates felt the pain localized in his leg. That's part of the story. Therefore, only his temperance is true temperance.
Okay, so again, only the purificatory man has true temperance. Um, right, because the ordinary man, he's still exchanging pleasures for pleasures and pains for pains. The ethical man, since he's just well brought up, he's just concerned with honor, right? He doesn't want to be ashamed, right? The the man with political, he thinks that it's necessary for the attainment of goods. Um, like, yes, I will rest now, or I will give myself this treat so I can work better later. And then only the philosopher, only the purificatory person, he just doesn't take pleasure into account in his moral calculus. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
And it's like I so the way Socrates felt pain in his left leg. So let's go after this. But I suspect the idea is something like Socrates feels the pain in his, he doesn't say I am in pain, but my leg hurts, right? And
Mm-hmm.
he's drawing a distinction. So like the purificatory person should just say, oh, my tongue feels nice, and not, oh, this tastes, I like this. Um, and so where is this? This is in 60b1 to c7. So, well, I guess I can share this since I gotta read it. Hmm. So Socrates sat up on bed, bent his leg, and rubbed it with his hand. And as he rubbed it, he said, "What a strange thing that which men call pleasure seems to be, and how astonishing the relation it has with what is thought to be its opposite, namely pain. A man cannot have both at the same time. Yet if he pursues and catches one, he is almost always bound to catch the other, also, like two creatures with one head. I think that if Aesop had noticed this, he would have composed a fable that a god wished to reconcile their opposition, but could not do so. So he joined their two heads together, and therefore, when a man has the one, the other follows later. This seems to be happening to me. My bonds cause pain in my leg, and now pleasure seems to be following. Okay, so it's like he has this totally detached relationship, pleasure and pain here, where he's like reflecting on it as like, oh, this is what people feel. Pain, pleasure, how interesting.
Hmm.
Okay. So that's the attitude that the purificatory person has to pain and pleasure. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's something that happens to other people, and he's getting to share in the experience. Like, hmm, wow, oh, so this is what enjoying a meal tastes like, huh? Okay. This teaches us about virtue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess it's also like you see your that also like shows us kind of like a strategy of how to relate to your experiences in a purificatory way, which is that you see, you know, like there's that meme that people keep repeating, like no experience is individual. Like when people see that other people like post things that are very similar to theirs. And so that's like the proper attitude of the purificatory philosopher. No experience is individual. What you're experiencing is actually something that you share with others and that you're and that you can reflect on from a different from a distance then.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, we have time.
Yeah. Okay. Um, to continue a little. The that's the highest level. Okay. Now, 162. Formulating a general rule to distinguish between imperfect and perfect virtues. Socrates postulates that virtue is not exchange, but total extirpation of affects. If it is to be an exchange, it does not consist in choosing one affect instead of another, greater or smaller, more respectable or less honorable, nor, in Epicurean terminology, stationary pleasures for erratic ones, nor, in accordance with Stoic doctrine, natural pleasures for those against nature. So this is attacking all these other schools as being what Socrates is talking about here. Um, but insight in exchange for all affect, so that instead of the emotions, we acquire insight which can judge the emotions themselves, because it belongs to reason only, and is naturally willing and able to dominate. Hmm.
Right. So he attacks these, I guess there's the natural and ethical standards, which is greater for smaller and more respectable for less honorable. Um, then he attacks the standards of other schools. So the Epicureans, you know, you don't want to have these pleasures and pains that you know, disturb your peace of mind. And so you want to, for instance, have the intellectual pleasures, which are nobler and more stationary, instead of the pleasures of food and drink, which are erratic and they make you feel bad afterwards. Um, and you should also not prefer, say, no, I'm going to have the natural pleasures, those that are, you know, I agree with my constitution as a human being, against those that are against nature. So you drank too much or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the natural pleasures for the Stoics. So the Stoics also have this doctrine of apatheia, um, which is that you shouldn't take the affects as guides for action, but they do talk about like that there's a certain delight in performing virtue and something like that. So they want to say, and so you're saying it's also not that. It's also that like there are these good pleasures that you're exchanging it from. No, rather, you have to give up pleasure and pleasures and pains, all affects, because they will give you not any new kinds of pleasures, but insight, right? But an activity. So that's one way of framing it, so that you're not going to be responding to a change, right, into a passive process, but you're going to be engaging in activity. And that's actually part of the distinction between natural and unnatural in against nature, right? Because what is against nature is violent, and so you are changing something, whereas natural is an activity, it's just developing a pre-existent power. But he's saying something more, right? So it's not just an activity, but rather insight, right? So this is also part of the problem of the Stoics, and like since Platonists criticize this, which is that they think that they have no good account of what the wise man actually does. Or rather, their account of what the wise man actually busies himself with is physics. And physics is just studying the world of passions that they're trying to get away from. And so they're actually like in the model of the Theaetetus, right? So you become what you study. And so if you're going to be studying physics and this world of conflict and change, you're going to end up falling back into those patterns. And so it's not sustainable. The Platonist ethics is sustainable because they do have an actual stable content that you engage with, which is the eternal forms, right? Which is you engage in insight and noesis. Here, insight is phronesis. But anyway, you engage in contemplative activity, which has some, and so the point is that you give up so all affects in order to know better, right? And so that is the exchange that you can do, right? Um, and that's and then he adds these things that which can judge the emotions themselves because it belongs to reason only and is naturally willing. Well, so yeah, since it is not itself an emotion at all, it's not even a natural pleasure, it can judge the pleasures. That is the idea. Um, okay. That's and I guess the example of Socrates' leg also illustrates this, right? You give up immediate participation in what you experience, saying that this is something unique and happening to me and affecting me. And you then get the opportunity to reflect on that as something general that happens to human beings.
Hmm.
So you're exchanging passion for insight, and that's how Socrates relates to his pain in his legs is a really clear example.
Okay. Uh, which is not really like an exchange. It's like doesn't what we're calling exchange was just for this criticism of the.
Right. The word exchange comes from the text, and so that's why he's focusing on the exchange. But it's and so he's also trying to explain what Socrates means to exchange things for wisdom. But there is something like an exchange, just that once, since the soul is by nature rational or something, once you extirpate the passions, then this comes to the fore.
Mhm. Okay. Um, one more. 163. Why does Plato omit justice from the list of spurious and imperfect virtues? Hmm.
Right. In the passage, he doesn't mention justice. He mentions prudence, wisdom, and courage, but he doesn't mention justice.
Mm-hmm. Because there are no bodily affects in which it can manifest itself. Because justice is this like general virtue in the picture.
Right, which is what Damascus will say.
Okay. Or rather, because as we know, is the quality of all the three parts of the soul. That's the same thing, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah, so the one is that there's no bodily affect, so I guess there's like as he said, there's pleasure which is associated with temperance, or like there's contentment which is associated with temperance. Yeah, or like desire is associated with temperance and control of desire. There's fear for courage. And well, does he actually mention insight? Let me go back to see which things he does mention. Um, he uh, no, he just mentions uh, right. I think it's just that it's this discussion of just courage and temperance, because later on he mentions both wisdom and justice. So yeah, so it's just courage and temperance that he has in mind here. And then he'll
okay, maybe it's
say
for
for the same reason.
right for the
Yeah,
same reason that he leaves out insight also because there's a quality of reason. So it's
right.
not. It's also doesn't have this problem. It's only temperance and courage that have the problem. And among the perfect virtues, wherever these are included too, because that's how it would be correct. Okay.
Right. So in a sense, maybe, there is justice and courage. I guess there's no, there like there's already real justice at the level of political virtue, but maybe there's not real No, there might be real insight because you are using reason there. But at the level of ethical virtues, there's just courage and temperance. There's no justice and reason yet because reason hasn't been activated yet. Reason is remember there is reason because reason is always imposing order in the lower levels, but the reason is outside you. It's the reason of your parent or your teacher or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, 164. The Attic commentators make all the perfect virtues mentioned their purifying virtues and understand by the affects those who can attend a life of purification. For example, by pleasure, the joy of being free of the body; by fear, complete avoidance of all that is extraneous. Harpicratio, on the contrary, takes all the virtues as social virtues, and therefore understands the affects of those of life and society. Not sure which passage this is. In our opinion, the passage should be read as consisting of two parts. The first of which deals with the social virtues, in which prudence takes the place of the affects. The second with the purificatory virtues. So both are correct, basically. Socrates indeed is apparently still referring to the same acts when he continues, but really and truly virtue is a purification from these, i.e., evidently from the irrational affects, from which purificatory virtue is said to cleanse us completely. Therefore, he adds the article to the several virtues and says that really and truly virtue is a purification from affects.
Right. Let me read the passage to help make this clearer. Um, um, oh, my good Simius, I fear this is not the right exchange to attain virtue, to exchange pleasures for pleasures, pains for pains, and fears for fears, the greater for the less, like coins, but that the only valid currency for which all these things should be exchanged is wisdom. With this, we have real courage and moderation and justice, and in a word, true virtue with wisdom, whether pleasures and fears and all such things be present or absent. Right? So there's, I guess these are the affects, right? It seems like there are
Mm-hmm.
still some affects connected with virtue. When these are exchanged for one another in separation from wisdom, such virtue is only an illusory appearance of virtue. It is in fact fit for slaves without soundness or truth, whereas in truth, moderation, courage, and justice are purging away of all such things, and wisdom itself is a kind of cleansing or purification. Okay, so the first part is about the social virtues, and that's where he thinks says pleasures and fears can be present or absent. But then he says, and then when these are exchanged for one another in separation, and then later when he says, whereas in truth, moderation and courage and justice are purging away, then he's talking about purificatory virtues. Okay. Um,
And the question here, and this is something like, what are these? Whether pains and pleasures or fears are present? Um, like, why would they be present?
Exactly. And so the Attic commentators over there, they say that pleasure would be the joy of being free from the body, right? And fear complete avoidance of all that is extraneous. And
Mm-hmm.
but Harpocratia says no, this is about life in this society, and so you still have pleasures and fears and such things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that ends this section. Next time we'll talk about philosophy as initiation. Uh, so what, and so the connection of philosophy with theurgy. It's a dense passage, so I'm not sure if we'll get through it, but we might finish the Damascus next week.
Okay.
We'll see. But it might take like two classes.
All
Um,
right. No problem.
all right, and we'll be in touch. Okay,
Yes, we will. Okay. Thank you.
okay, thank you.